Welcome back to the Angus Report and our special coverage of the National Beef Quality Audit. Here with me now is Dr. Dan Kniffen, a beef producer, faculty member at Penn State, and the producer chairman of the National BQA Advisory Board. Thanks for being here with us, Dan.
Thank you for helping us roll out this story on the National Beef Quality Audit.
Yeah, absolutely. And so help us kind of set the stage and why is this research so critically important to our nation's beef producers?
You know, for the industry, over the last 25 years, this is probably the most important set of data points that we have to help guide us forward as an industry. And we think about the data that's collected, the size and scope of the project. Who else would have the opportunity to collect this, or who would bother to collect this if we didn't do it ourselves? And you know, fortunately, through our beef checkoff dollars, we have that opportunity to put this kind of a program together and measure those performance traits that we need to potentially look at to help us make some improvements. With that said, when you look back over the checkoff program and we recognize that we've got about $11 or $12 per dollar invested return on investment with our checkoff program, you know, that number is huge, helping the industry be able to pull this kind of data together.
And so talk us through some of those kind of on-farm, real-world applications that you think have been gathered throughout this 2016 study that we've been talking about today.
You know, Dr. Belk did a nice job of covering the results of the study, but there are some things that we can do at the producer level that will help us continue to move the industry forward. One of those things that's a little concerning on my side was the fact that our percentage of bruising is up somewhat in our cattle. I think part of that is attributable to the fact that our cattle have gotten larger. And so as we look through the transportation equipment that we use, as we look at the handling equipment that we use, a lot of that was designed for cattle when they were somewhat smaller. And so now we're getting into challenges that as we are trying to use the same equipment that we were using 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and it just doesn't fit the cattle system as well right now. You know, it's probably imperative that producers take that opportunity to walk through their facilities, pay attention as they're handling and moving cattle, and identifying those points of pinch where we are potentially having some bruises occurred. The other opportunity that we have is we are just finishing up our BQA transportation program. And so that'll start to highlight some of those other issues that potentially need to be focused on when we're loading cattle and shipping cattle, and have that opportunity to raise the awareness of that sector of the industry so that we pay attention to what might be some of the improvements that we can make as we move forward.
So a new point of research this year is kind of looking at some of the mobility scoring in fed cattle. Can you tell us a little bit about what we learned from that?
That was an interesting data point that was collected this year for the first time. And interestingly enough, when we looked at that, we had cattle scored in a 1, 2, 3, or 4 system. 1 being cattle that just moved comfortably along. The cattle in the 2 category were cattle that might have stubbed a toe or, you know, just had one off step. But those 2 classifications were cattle that had no trouble keeping up with the group. And I am really proud to report for the industry that we had over 99% of our cattle that were surveyed actually were in the 1 or 2 category, which meant that they really didn't have any mobility issues whatsoever. And so I think that speaks volumes for the industry and for producers. The fact that we're making some good genetic selection for feet and legs in our cattle so that they can withstand our production systems that we have today.
What other kind of key takeaways are there in terms of genetics and what cattle producers can look for, and how you know, they can better manage those decisions on the farm?
You know, on the genetic side, the tools that we have available to us to now, and especially if you look at where the Angus Association is on the data that they're gathering and making available to producers. As a seed stock producer, you know, we make those decisions on the genetics that move down the pipeline. And so as a seed stock producer, you have to stay focused on those traits which are critically important. And with some of our new DNA sampling programs that we have, and building some more confidence and support into our EPD programs, there's a lot more data for the decisions to be made. And we have to remember that once you get beyond the seed stock producer and the cow-calf producer, Nobody else has the opportunity to change those genetics in those animals. And so it's vitally important that the correct decisions are made at that stage of the production chain so that we can meet the consumer demand when we get to the other end. Everybody else down the line has to manage what we have sent them. We need to make sure as an industry that we are sending them the proper cattle.
So in addition to genetic selection, what are some of those other management type decisions that ranchers might pay attention to in terms of opportunities?
A couple of things to probably think about is, one, if you are providing genetics to the industry, it would be good to interact with your customers downstream and try to collect some additional data on, for example, feedlot cattle. And how are those genetics that you are providing actually fulfilling the needs of the industry, and how are they performing? It's nice to have that data or that information on what we think these cattle are going to do, but until you measure it, we don't know that answer for sure. Additionally, something to think about is on the cow-calf sector, is moving forward with some form of animal identification. And the part that's of interest to me is the fact that that will help us open up more global markets. And we know the world demand for our protein is high. And one of the things that they always ask us about is that traceback capability. And so implementing an animal identification that will help us expand those global markets will be extremely important as we continue to move beef out into the world market.
Well, thanks so much for your time, Dan, and for giving us some great insight into what the audit really means for our producers back home. And so when we return, Josh White with NCBA will help us wrap up our discussions on the National Beef Quality Audit. Stay with us.